Hi, folks. This is the Moving Beyond Being Good podcast, and I'm Gary Ryan from Organisations That Matter, and it's a pleasure to be with you here for this episode. Now, on this podcast, we talk everything about leadership, particularly with a focus on servant leadership, service leadership, and authentic leadership, specifically as they relate to creating a culture that's psychologically safe for your people and enables you to create great results for the people you lead, yourself, and of course, your organisation. In this episode, it's an absolute pleasure to share a conversation with Bonnie Low-Kramen. Now, Bonnie is now a best-selling author with her newly released book, Staff Matters, and I'll let her explain in our conversation about her book and what it's all about. I will share that Bonnie was Olympia Dukakis's personal assistant for 25 years, and Olympia was an Academy Award-winning actress. And Bonnie learned a great deal about leadership and organisational culture through working with Bonnie, and then set up in 2011 her own business in training personal assistants, executive assistants, and also leaders for learning how to actually effectively utilize their personal assistants and or executive assistants. And that work has taken Bonnie across 14 countries and 20 states in the United States of America. It's 93% female is the workforce that are personal assistants and executive assistants. And Bonnie has learned a lot about the reality of workplaces for particularly females and males as well, and people of other genders. It's an extraordinary conversation. It's an absolute honor to have Bonnie on here. I'm sure you're actually going to absolutely love it. I look forward to getting your responses. Stay tuned for the entire episode because there's just gold nugget after gold nugget. Enjoy. I said I'm probably...
It's fine. You know, Gary, at this stage, I have no choice. Like, this is, you have those 5 kids of yours. I mean, I feel like I've gotten to have a peek of what you're made of on social media in a very short time. And I'm very grateful and super impressed by how kind of fearless you are to not play it safe, to take a stand. And as women are way more afraid to take a stand than men are. And I want to be a role model for that, because I feel like playing it safe and, you know, just, yeah, I don't know how to say it any better than that. You know, not to be, you know, really clear about your opinions and point of view is not helpful. You know, it's just not, because there are too many instances of people being traumatized on a daily basis.
Yes.
And if we look the other way and permit it, then we just become complicit. Something has to change. You know, by May 1st, I'm going to have 6 grandchildren.
Woo-hoo!
And, you know, my son is due with their second. I would be ready to kill if any of those kids, you know, came back to me and told me what some of the behaviors are happening, you know, the reports of stories that I'm hearing on a daily basis from the assistants of the world. And it just has to change, and or I'll die trying.
Well, I'm with you. And look, you know, with your book, Staff Matters, you know, we're certainly singing from the same song sheet. We're coming from different perspectives, no doubt.
Yeah.
And you know, my back in 2007, I called my company Organisations That Matter, because I wanted to work with organisations that understood they had human beings and not human resources. And you know, you've seen that post recently where I speak about the term human resources is well past its prime. And unfortunately, the majority of people working in human resources don't even know the history of the name. They don't know where it came from and actually what it means, and how deeply embedded that mindset and what I call mental models is in everything that comes out of HR. And because they've termed it HR, right? This acronym, it's as if we're supposed to forget what HR actually means. It still means human resources. And it's like 2023. We're not a pen. We're not a computer. We're not a chair. We're not a desk. We're a whole human being. And a guy called Russell Ackoff, who is the professor emeritus of the Wharton Business School, and I'm a huge fan of Russell's work. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago now at the age of 95. But he spoke about that ages don't begin and end. Ages fade in while another one fades away. And that the sort of leadership that you and I are advocating has actually been in existence since, in fact, the 1950s. But what's the challenge has been since this shareholder value concept equally came out in the early 1970s, that I know that you've written about that too. Unfortunately, every time there's a crisis that occurs, we have this immediately backflip to this scientific management method where human beings are just a number and we can just get rid of them. And, you know, just Rob Kalwarowski and Susan Hobson's interview with Jason Lippert from LCI Industries just came out today, my time. You'll be waking up for it. And, you know, Jason's story, Jason was actually one of three people with Karen Volo that catalyzed my book, Disruption Leadership Matters, that I wrote between May of 2020 and published in November of 2021. And it was catalyzed by the interview of Karen Volo from Sweden with Jason Lippert, Bob Chapman, and Gary Ridge. And those three all stated in May of 2020, no one within their organization was going to lose their job because of this pandemic. No one. And that has been a true statement for all three of those companies, being the Barry Waymiller Group with Bob Chapman, LC Industries with Jason Lippert, and the WD-40 company with Gary Ridge. Now, the fundamental reason why they were able to say that is because this core shift in thinking that they present, and what's beautiful about what they present is it's real and it's alive today, and we can look at it and we can learn from it. And you know, Bob Chapman's description of it about, you know, we've got to get the right people in the right seats on the bus. You recall what he said about the bus though?
Actually, I don't. I'm admitting to you, I have that whole article on my desktop, and so help me. I'm just admitting to you that I certainly know that term. Talk to me though. Talk to me about the bus.
Yeah. So what Bob Chapman says is, first and foremost, and he had this epiphany in 1997 when he was not running his business this way. At the time, it was a $220 million operation with about 1,500 staff. And he realized that he had not built a safe bus first. And what he meant by a safe bus is a safe bus is one that can sustain the economic ups and downs that are the way it really works. And that it should not be staff's fault when the economic downturns come. Staff should not lose their job. If they were good enough for us to hire when this was happening, they've got to be good enough for us to keep when this is happening. Now, his company is proof because it's a now $3.5 billion company with 12,000 staff, none of whom lost their jobs in the GFC, none of whom lost their jobs during the pandemic, because they've grown every single time they've hit the bottom of a downturn because they kept their people. Jason Lippert's done the same thing. His company $5 billion in turnover with 15,000 staff. It's actually grown through the pandemic. WD-40, the same story. And, you know, it's a pity there's only a few examples like this, but the good thing is they exist.
Yeah, and that was the shock when I would ask major, leaders, who do you admire? What leaders are doing it right?
Yeah.
And it was, I would ask business professors, the people who teach this stuff, and they were hard pressed to come up with even one name, never mind three. So that told me right there that this problem is enormous. And so where is the disconnect? Most certainly has to fall in business school, but it also has to do with the education that HR, human people resources are getting or not getting. That, human resources professionals tell me that their education is they either don't have a degree, or that the training they're getting is deficit. It's not responsive to current needs. And my community, the assistants of the world, actually are insisting on getting trained. If not college degrees, they are actively seeking certifications and additional workshops in order to, they know they have to sharpen their saw. It's so crazy, Gary, in the assistant world, and this is the world over, company leaders spend a ton of money on computer hardware, on the computer software to be in that computer, and almost no dollars in training the humans behind the keyboard. It's not logical, that where's, you have to look where the money is being spent, what's happening. So that's a huge problem that, who's asleep at the wheel here? Does that make sense to you?
100% it does, because in 1999, July of 1999, I went back to university to do my second degree, which was a graduate diploma in human resource management. And I thought that degree was about people. And it absolutely was not about people. It was about data and systems and processes and the law. And I'm not saying those things don't matter.
Right.
I'm not saying they don't matter. They do matter. However, it was clear that the human beings were just a number to be fitted into these systems and processes. And it alarms me that still today, the universities of the world, the great universities of the world, are still pumping out human resource management degrees. They're still calling it that. It's like, you've got the research universities to tell us this is just wrong, It's an oxymoron to call a human being a human resource. It's just that simple.
And on top of that, so many people, and it's not their fault. It's an easy point of entry in a company.
Yeah.
Many people enter HR, for lack of another different term, without any training at all, and it's on the job training. And to not have the people piece, the emotional intelligence piece, is causing damage. There's a lot of damage being caused in the workplace. The assistants of the world certainly see it. And so what's the result? The result is workplace bullying that's running rampant, sexual harassment that's being permitted, unfair compensation practices. So the staff knows when people are being paid unfairly. And the pandemic has really caused a very big skew in that. So Gary, we could spend hours and hours talking about the problems. And my gosh, my bookshelf is filled with leadership and management books, great ones, best-selling ones. You point to Bob Chapman's book from 2016. And, we all know Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, right? I graduated from Rutgers, and that's where Daniel Goleman went. He's the king of emotional intelligence. So and that came out in the 70s.
Yeah.
So we're sitting here in 2023. What I wanted to get up at 4 a.m. to talk to you about is, what's the fix? What do you see? I thought we could put our heads together about what will fast track this. Here I am in Florida. You're in Australia. we each have followings on social media and LinkedIn, and you're doing a bang up job. And I just love the work you're doing. Talk to me about what you see that is going to help your 5 kids. It's going to help my 6 grandkids. It's going to help the people who are thinking about, like, gee, I have to pay my bills and I guess I'm going to have to go to work somehow.
Yeah. Well, I think it starts, and look, those 3 companies that I mentioned are still with Super Chai Ravanant from the CP Group in Thailand. I think it's important to mention an Asian company here. I do reference Super Chai Ravanant in my book, partly because I think there's a lot of Western bias towards Asian companies. It's negative, and again, at the start of the pandemic, now they've got 400,000 employees across 20 countries. Like, this is seriously big. And they're in both agribusiness, as in they grow food, and they're in retail. They run a lot of 7-Elevens retail stores throughout Asia. And again, Super Chai really is very keen about caring for the human beings in the business. It is a family business that he has inherited. However, he wasn't just given it. He had to go and run his own business. He got the capital from the family, fair enough, but he actually had to go and prove that he could run a business in his own right, as a bit of a learning practice space, an action learning space for him. They're wealthy enough to do that. And that's where he learned human beings actually matter. And equally, at the start of the pandemic, he told the staff, you are not going to lose their jobs. And what he did with the executive and the leaders throughout the organization, he said, right, I want you to go to your non-salary line items and find savings to pay for the salaries for some people whom will not actually be able to do any work for a period of time. Most of the rest of the world did the opposite thing. Let's go to the salaries, reduce headcount so we can pay for the physical things, right? So at the start is this mindset around genuine care for human beings. And when leaders genuinely care for other human beings, and look, Bob Chapman uses this metaphor, which is, it's not useful for 100% of folk in the world, but he says, look, in 1997, one of his other epiphanies was he recognized that each of the 1,500 people in the business were someone's child, irrespective of the 70-odd-year-old staff he had. That person was still at some point someone's child. And how he cared for, he had a Brady Bunch family, 3 of his own, 3 of his new partners' family, 6 children, which were all adults at the time.
Right.
And he said, the way that we care for them, of course, when they go to work, just like you and I were discussing at the start of this conversation, Bonnie, we want others to be stewards of them. We want them to care for them in that way. And his epiphany was, we don't actually do that here at Barry Waymiller. We don't care for our 1,500 people as if they're someone else's child.
Yeah. He
doesn't mean be their parent, because that's not correct.
Right.
He means care for them in that same way. And he talks about, so if a child does something wrong, do we just turn a blind eye? No, we don't. We find a way in a supportive, caring way to on the times, educate them to help them be on the right path. Okay. And that's what he means by care. And I think this mindset that's pre-exists shareholder value. And this is the key. If folk listening to us go, oh, Gary's recommending develop a strategy of care for people. It's not a strategy. It's actually a core fundamental value and belief first and foremost. But what we're seeing is that the things that the shareholder value view of the world wants are actually achieved through this view of the world. Like, these companies are outperforming their competitors like nobody's business. So if you can't have it as a strategy. It's actually got to start with, we genuinely care for people first. So I was just going to say that in my work, vision, mission, and values are so useless in most organizations. It's not funny. And they're fundamentally useless because of the way the leaders just don't use them. Other than when they're getting developed,
right,
they're fundamentally useless after that point, because leaders actually don't know how to keep them alive. And it's actually pretty simple to keep them alive. Reference them regularly, talk about them, clarify them, have stories to highlight. I mean, Sean Callahan here in Australia has got a wonderful book called Putting Stories to Work. And he's an expert in organizational storytelling. And Sean's Shawn Callahan, and Putting Work. And I'm a big fan of Sean's work. His company's called Anecdotally, and he demonstrates the different ways that we can use stories in organization. And I believe, and certainly I try to do this in my education of leaders, is teach them storytelling, but let's relate it back to those words and your vision, your mission or purpose and your values. Right. And equally, I have this conversation so many times, and I know in the podcast episode that you had with Rob and Susan, and you spoke about people can start in the middle. It doesn't just have to be at the top. Remember, I don't know if you, yep. And I agree with you absolutely that we've got to be able to actually do it at all levels. And so many leaders go in the middle levels, but the senior leaders never talk about them. They never talk about the values. So I don't. So I say to them, do you believe in them? And they invariably say yes.
Yeah.
Say, well, why would you base your behavior on someone else's behavior that you disagree with just because they're more senior than you in a hierarchy? Why would you do that? Why would you just talk about them anyway? And so that's what I encourage people. There's doable things like that. If you've got company values and you believe them, have conversations with your team members about how are they being brought to life in this team that we're in day to day.
So here we are in the post-pandemic world. I have a sense here in the United States that we're at a moment right now, that we're at a really important pivotal time, that the danger is thinking, like, if you go to New York City right now, it's as if there was never a pandemic. The streets are bustling. You see almost no masks. It is as lively as it ever were. And I visited there during the pandemic, and I've never seen New York City be feeling like a ghost town, and it looked like it was battered and beaten up. And now it is back, baby. I think the danger is that that the mentality is, well, that happened, it's over, it was horrible, but we're going to forget about it now. Most staff are still feeling the real impact that we went through something for, almost 3 years. The collective planet went through something very major. And I think it would be a mistake to disregard it and to not talk about it as we move forward to try to create something new. Do you feel it too, that we're at a really important time right now where business schools have to make some important decisions, human resources, schools need to take a fresh look at how we're proceeding? What do you think about that? Are we, or is this just going to be another wave?
Well, look, I think this is an opportunity. The pandemic is actually a massive global opportunity for us on this very extremely important topic. It's again why I wrote Disruption Leadership Matters, because the disruption of the pandemic has actually brought to the surface the flawed mindset and mental models of leaders. It's brought them to the surface. And we therefore have an opportunity to recognize how flawed they were and to do something about it. Or we just let it slip by. And look, my concern is the war in the Ukraine is extending for a lot of folk in the world, particularly folk in Europe, the trauma of the pandemic that globally I think we experienced to some degree, each of us, and the economic fear that war's catalyzed is giving command and control view of the world space to go back and get alive and well again. And the way that's manifesting itself here in Australia is this whole conversation or lack of conversation in too many cases, to be brutally honest with you, Bonnie, about returning on site to work, and organizations mandating effectively or leaving it so ambiguous as what is the situation now,
Right.
that the ambiguity looks like you better get back on site. And the challenge with that is people know, I mean, they're not stupid. They know that they proved they can work productively from home. They've proven it. And
Yeah.
Now, I believe, and Amy Edmondson's just written an article in HBR about this with Mortensen. He's, I forget his first name, Mortensen, about we do need to connect with human beings. We do need to be in person. Absolutely agree with that. But this push that we're sort of seeing here in Australia from a lot of organisations to go effectively 100% back on site, that's not a sign of leaders listening, in my view.
No. Well, in my book, which you very kindly read, chapter 4 is called Ask First.
Yeah.
For me, what I hear globally, because my work is very much about spending my life in rooms physically and on webcam with groups of staff, mainly assistants, but with their leaders as well. And what the assistants of the world say is they know that an ideal situation is a hybrid one, a couple of days in the office, a few days at home, they're highly productive. But here's the thing, a piece that so many leaders are skipping over is the asking part. That staff would come in, they would, but how about involving them in the conversation about that decision that directly impacts their life? Leaders are arbitrarily making that decision. Like famously, Tim Cook of Apple made that decision, and the staff of Apple took out full-page ads in newspapers to say, sorry, Tim Cook, we can't sign on to what you're asking us to do, to go in. He said, let's go in these days, and without really considering who these people are. The pandemic changed things. And if you painstakingly hire staff in the first place, company leaders, my frustration is, we know that company leaders spend millions of dollars in the process of hiring people. And those people are hired for a reason, at least one reason. Everybody is we call them the chosen ones. They're the chosen ones. People who are working in companies have been chosen, and they were hired for purposes. And so why wouldn't you want to access what they know as leaders are making these major decisions that have monetary impact and ramifications? It's the staff are not only about the job description that they're doing, but it's about what they know, their institutional knowledge. Some people call it tribal knowledge, what they walk around with, and who they know. Because so many staff are complaining and quitting because they feel under-leveraged, underutilized. And what is that indicative of? Their leaders are not asking them. They're not accessing them. They're a golden natural resource that company leaders have, is the rich resource in their staff, who would happily give them opinions and points of view and great advice if only they were asked. And so my hope is, business professors tell me that the curriculum at business school is changing. There's no wonder leaders are caught, without knowing, like, what do I do with half staff that's at home and half at work? Absolutely no one had training for how to manage a staff in that way. And so if leaders are turning to HR to say, well, you solve it. You're in HR, you should know how to do it. Well, they don't know how to do it either. So who the people, ironically, who do know how to do it are the staff themselves.
Yes.
They know how, but if only they were asked.
Well, yeah, it takes time to build a safe bus. I understand that. And there will be times that, for financial reasons, companies, while they're trying to build a safe bus, are going to make mistakes, and they might have to let people go. But they've got to do that as humanely as they possibly can, and with as much support as they possibly can, to help those folk find another job. That's best practice too. Like actually investing in finding another job. Like, why couldn't they keep them for 6 months? And your job, while we're paying you, because we got the money, is to find another job. Imagine that.
Right.
Imagine that.
And that would be a humane way to handle it. What is so troubling to me is the trauma that this is causing. I spoke 2 weeks ago. In the news, we've heard about all the massive layoffs, especially in the tech companies. The huge companies, Google and Salesforce, and on, right? And I spoke with one of the executive assistants at one of those companies who woke up at 6 a.m. and, as she always did, signed onto her computer. Now, this is a woman who's been doing great at her company, was recently promoted, got a great performance review, and she was so excited about the future. In her 40s, she has a great future. And she tried to sign onto her computer to find out that she could not have access. So she instantly called her manager thinking that, the server's down. Like, she went to solve the problem. When she got her manager on the phone, because she knew that her manager was always available at that point, because that's when they started work with the time difference, she was told, "Oh, it's not a server problem. You no longer have a job." And that's how she found out. It was backwards, that's how she found out, is that she was locked out of the system. And I've checked in with her, and it's been traumatizing. That is one singular example, the thousands of examples in the workplace. It is not necessary to traumatize people and to be inhumane. What I like to ask leaders is, imagine if that was your wife or your daughter. Is that really the way we want people to be treated? No one ever starts a job thinking that they're going to be let go in an inhumane way. We have high hopes when we start a job. It is not acceptable to me. And Gary, we haven't touched on gender. Most of the people you've been naming this today have been men. So I've been very happy to hear you talk about Michelle Hunt. We need more women leaders. We need a female sensibility in leadership, writing books, being in boardrooms, helping to lead companies. I'd love your point of view on, I'm sure you have one, about the idea that half of our workforce in the world are female.
Yeah.
And the pandemic has run rampant. It has chased many women out of the workforce and altering their experience in the workforce. What is your take on what's happening with women in the workplace?
Like Cheryl Bachelda, Dare to Serve, the Popeye story.
Mm-hmm.
What a great story.
Tell the story. Tell the story for those people who don't know.
So Cheryl Bachelda took over as CEO of Popeyes, which is like a Kentucky Fried Chicken franchise in the United States, and it was performing abysmally. Like its share price was something around the $7 mark US, and lots of franchises around the place. And she believed in servant leadership, and she felt that there weren't enough practical examples of the theory of servant leadership actually being deliberately put into practice. Mm-hmm. So when she went for the CEO's role, she said, and she was very explicit with the board, I'm going to basically use servant leadership as a practice field here to turn this company around. So we're going to teach everyone how to be a servant leader, whether you're a leader or not, because ultimately it's about, in our case, serving our franchisees so that they can serve their staff, so that they can serve the actual customers that come through the door. Mm-hmm. We are going to use the word love. We are going to learn to love our franchisees, and they actually have a hate relationship. Now, by 2015, when she finished her time there, their share price was in the vicinity of $95 US.
Mm-hmm.
And the reduction in staff turnover, etc. Her book, I don't know, I've got it here. It's called Dare to Serve.
Mm-hmm. Well, in my book, Staff Matters, I felt that I had no choice but to share the challenges in very real ways, that my goal was to expose what was really happening for both men and women in the workplace. But I've got a lot of leadership books, and I haven't really read one that in any depth gets into what's happening, the difference between what's happening with women in the workplace versus men. And it's different. They have different experiences, and I've lived it myself. And so perhaps that gives it perspective. But I wanted to focus on both the issues, the challenges, the problems, and also the leaders who are doing things very well in response. Because, there's only one way to fix a problem, and that is, unfortunately, to look at the harsh reality of the trauma being caused by, let's take bullying and sexual harassment for a moment. I include the information in the book about how only 6 of our United States, of which there are 50, require sexual harassment training. So if in any given company, that's a problem. If you have, the data is clear that even though some women do sexually harass men, that the data is overwhelmingly such that it's men who are sexually harassing women in general. That is, the majority of the instances, that is what's happening. Because inevitably I have men say to me, well, Bonnie, women sexually harass men also. I'm like, yes, that is absolutely true. But the majority of instances is the other way. And when you know that data point, that only 6 states require it, then that means the others, it's optional. And therefore, then company leaders have a choice to make. Do they want to address that problem or not? Do they have an employee retention problem? Do they particularly have a female retention problem? That would be an indicator that there is an issue. And that's a kind of issue that many women are very reluctant to speak up about and to, raise. So there are some big problems that need to be addressed. And I decided to talk to the elephants in the room. What do you think, Gary?
Well, we need to, because, as you might have seen in that LinkedIn post about the female staff that shared with me that they had been told that they could not expect to be able to continue hybrid working arrangements because they didn't have a family, aka you don't have children, by a male manager. And I was shocked. I honestly was shocked, Bonnie, that I was told this just last week by two women in the same organization who I've got a lot of respect for. Now, in both their instances, they said, you cannot say that to me. They were vulnerable and courageous and said, you will stop this. You need to stop right now because this is discrimination. My status of having children or not is not what that policy says. I was in shock from the perspective of, how could a male around about my age think that it was okay to say that to anybody, right?
And I'm sitting here, and I read your post, and I'm sitting here being not shocked. It is horrifying what leaders are saying, and it's in large part out of ignorance. They don't know that it is not okay to say such a thing. There has been no precedent. Like, you would think it's just logical and it's the right thing to do, but it's not logical. And that's why it's important that your book exists and my book exists to show in anecdotal ways, actual stories, the, the problem, the pain, the damage that it causes to speak to staff like that. You don't think that that's demoralizing and diminishing, not only illegal, but what does that do to a person to hear that? It's that you're completely disrespecting my desire to be treated fairly. We all, from the time we're little kids, we want the rules to be fair. We want to be treated like others, and we know instantly from the time we're really little, we know we can recognize favoritism. We recognize when someone is being treated differently than we are. We know when we're being left out, and that feeling goes right with us into adulthood, right? Yeah. I see it every day.
Yeah.
And it triggers people. It's like, oh, okay, so here's another instance. And women often just sit in it. And honestly, I've had women say to me, Bonnie, I didn't even know that I was being bullied until you described what it is. And then I realized, it's become normalized.
Yeah.
It's become completely normalized for women to be diminished in meetings. Like, how does this manifest? To be interrupted, to have an idea that they say, to not have any reaction, but then a man will follow it up with the same idea, and they'll be like, Joe, what a fabulous idea. And what I train women to say is, Joe, that's so great that you like Jill's idea. Maybe the two of you can work on it together.
Yeah.
Right?
Practice.
Women get interrupted 6 times more than men do. So, John, sorry, I wasn't quite done with what I was saying. I'd like to finish my thought. And I discussed this in my chapter called Sex.
Yes.
I decided, let me just call it sex, and it's about gender in the workplace. I don't think we can get to a better place in the workplace, Gary, unless we have honest conversations about what's happening with the genders in our workplace.
Well, these just the male female dimension, let alone folks that are LGBTIQ plus members of those communities, and identifying as different genders,
right?
Like you asked me about the what am I witnessing with females. So in a meeting late last year, a leader that I'm working with in a meeting, I'm going to use the name May for the female. That's not the person's real name, but had asked the men, what do you think? And then actually said this, even May, what do you think? And I'm like horrified. And just May didn't respond, right? Was on Zoom, and I'm like, the meeting was ending, but that phrase, even May, what do you think, was so demeaning. He didn't even know he said it.
He was clueless.
Completely clueless.
Right. So that's what I say to rooms of women. I say, is it reasonable to think that they're oblivious and clueless to the way they're coming across? And most women say, oh, yeah, I can understand that they're clueless and oblivious. Others will say, oh, no, they know exactly what they're doing. And that may be true. But for so many people, they're about themselves. So many, it's just human nature that we tend to primarily be thinking about our point of view, and we're looking at things through our lens. And therefore, it's easy for people to be clueless and oblivious. So I ask rooms of women, what's the only way to make somebody be not oblivious or clueless? And they yell back at me. They say, tell them. You have to say something. You have to tell them. And so we cannot, and of course that's true, we cannot suffer in silence any longer. Now, I was lucky. I worked with the actress Olympia Dukakis for 25 years. And Olympia Dukakis was one of the most outspoken and articulate, assertive women, often aggressive, but assertive women I've ever known. And so, you can't be it if you can't see it.
Yeah.
It's because now I get to teach what Olympia taught me to other women, and which is that you have a right to say what you need. You have a right to say that what was said to me in that meeting was offensive. And while it was great that you said something to that person, I would be supporting May to also say something to that person. That we must get better at speaking up and finding our voices in this global workplace. And my hope is that Staff Matters does that for staff. I love that you and I both chose the word matters for our book, and there are other books with that phrase. They do. We have work to do, but I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic. I think social media has an opportunity to be a game changer. I think your post that you did speaking directly to men about, what was said to those women.
And so that last point you made, and this could be really great advice for men like myself and other male allies, because it is one of the trickier things that I find, because I don't want to disempower women by stepping in and being the hero knight in shining armor and solving the problem on their behalf, because I think that actually disempowers. So what advice do you have for men when we do witness these things? So at the same time, we want the behavior to be called out, at the same time not disempower the woman.
Right.
Or
if we could roll back time, Gary, what I would be saying to you as your new friend is, Gary, what would be great is if you could go to May immediately and say, I saw what happened in there and it's not okay. How would you like me to handle this? I'm totally fine going to John and talking with him. What do you feel about that? Because I believe it needs to be addressed. What do you think, May?
Yes.
I think that is an important step, is to put power back in a woman's hands, or the person who was diminished in that conversation. I do think it is appropriate at times for leaders to step in. I have a quick story of my own. Pretty early on in my work, I began with Olympia when I was in my 20s, and I was a pretty shy and not assertive young woman. Smart, but I was not eager to speak up. And I was on the phone with a producer who was going to be working with her on the next project. And on the phone, he chose to be abusive with me and profane and interrupted a lot. And just was really, it doesn't bear, the details are not really valid here to say. And I got off the phone and I was really shaken up, and I decided, well, I have to tell Olympia what happened, because she's going to be working with this man. It's not that he's out of our life and then we can forget about it. He's going to be a presence in our daily work. And I said, I need to tell you what just happened. And I told her as factually as I could. And she looked at me. And at that moment, I remember thinking, I'm not sure. And I saw her get angry. I saw her face change. And I really didn't know in that moment if she was angry at me. And what came out of her mouth was, Bonnie, you don't have to take that from anybody. Are you going to handle it, or am I? And that's a version of what I just advised you to do with May, with our theoretical May. She put the power back on me. I could have said, could you please handle him? Now but I said, oh no, I'll handle him. I'll do it. Because she made it she gave me the power. She gave me the license. She gave me the permission. She made it clear that I got the message loud and clear that abusive language was not going to be acceptable from anybody.
Mm.
And she made it safe
Mm.
for me to assert myself. And, we began this conversation about you using the word safe, a safe
Yes.
place.
Yeah.
If leaders, anybody listening to this, what I know for sure is when people feel safe, they will tell you everything. But if people are walking around in terror and fear of repercussions and backlash and being labeled troublemakers, etc., they will tell you nothing.
Mm.
Or my students say to me, or Bonnie, we just tell them what we think they want to hear. And then they get off our backs and we're able to avoid. Like that, my friends, is real life. That's what happens in real life. That's not theoretical at all. That's real life.
Yeah. And it does not serve the leaders one iota
No.
that people are telling them what they think they want to hear, and they're using that information as part of the data for their decisions.
Yes. That's what scares me. Yeah. That's what I'm concerned about, is that all these decisions with money attached are being made right now by leaders who probably often do not have complete information because their staff who they've hired are not feeling safe to tell them. And that may be the most important thing we share in this last hour, Gary.
Yeah. Candor is incredibly important. Now, thank you for this conversation. Thank you for agreeing to have this chat with me. I saw just before we got on the call that your book is number 2 and 4 and 12 in 3 categories currently on Amazon. Now I learned.
Thank you. The hot news, it became number 1 today in organizational learning on Kindle. It was the first day. Today's March 14th, and it hit number 1. Thank you for recognizing that. I'm hopeful. I want hopefully your listeners and this is way more than about book sales. This is about creating information that will provide a conversation that will ignite a productive conversation between staff and their leaders to fix what's broken. If we're looking around and seeing we've had a battered and bruised workplace. I mean, ever since 9/11. We had 9/11, then a few years later, we had the financial meltdown on Wall Street. Those two things created such volatility in the workplace. And I believe what I see is that the humans have had a much harder time keeping up with all the changes in the workplace. And then the pandemic just threw it all. It's like a tsunami hit the global workplace, is what I see. And we're still trying to recover. And it's going to take a while. But as you said, we have an opportunity right now to fix this thing. And I sure hope that the very bright minds around the world choose to do it.
So do I. And your book, and I know we have spoken about this, and you just mentioned it, that the sales don't really matter, but they do from the perspective of wisdom. I believe your book represents wisdom. Okay, and D. Hock spoke about the difference between data and information and knowledge and understanding and ultimately wisdom. And when he wrote The Birth of the Chaotic Age, he spoke about back then in the late 1990s that the ratio of information to wisdom was like, in your room, put a dot on the wall. That's wisdom. And then get a line and all the way around your room with this line all the way until it comes back again. That was then the current ratio of information to wisdom. And we're now 26 years later. I don't know how many more times that's even gotten less. So we need access to wisdom. And why I'm a fan of your book is because I think it's representing wisdom that the world needs to take advantage of the opportunity that we've got now. And that's why I'm a big fan.
As a writer, you sit in a room alone a lot. And then you hope and pray that you've got your finger on the pulse of what will help people. And, you've got those 5 kids and I've got these 6 grandkids. We want it to be better for them. And I want it to be better for the staff that's currently working. But in the end, we're going to finish someday. And we want to leave a legacy that's going to matter for future leaders. And that's the hope. That's the hope. And I'm optimistic that it's going to happen. I'm so grateful for you, Gary Ryan, and your work you're doing. Thank you. Well, so, Gary, I look forward to our next conversation.
Me too. And look, the work that you're doing with the assistants around the world, the many tens of thousands now that you've worked with, I think 14 countries is the number, is extraordinary piece of work. You have paid it forward so many times over. I'm blessed to have had an opportunity to, have 70 minutes of your time now. So keep going well, keep spreading the word, and we'll catch up again soon, and I'll keep supporting you the best I can.
And you too, Gary. You take good care. Thank you.
Folks, wasn't that just extraordinary? I'm so delighted to have had the opportunity to have a conversation with Bonnie Low-Kramen. All the links for the books, including Bonnie's new book, Staff Matters, are in the podcast notes. Once again, this is Gary Ryan from Organisations That Matter, and I look forward to working with you next time.